Sefer Vayikra. This week it's read as a double parsha, known as Bahar Bukotai. And this week I want to talk about standing. Now, standing is secretly an incredibly important idea in Jewish tradition. You might be saying to yourself, like, okay, like everyone has to stand like that. Well, like, I don't exactly know what makes that special. And at the same time, the most important prayer in Judaism, the Amidah, which is recited in every service, that also is referred to by the rabbis as Ha Tefillah. The prayer comes from the root La'amod, which means to stand. So an accurate way to translate the word Amidah is the standing prayer. So standing is like secretly a very important physical idea in Judaism. Which leads me to this quote that I love from Leo Tolstoy. It's very popular in certain social justice sectors, because I think the message will be fairly obvious, which is, I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am sorry for him and wish to lighten his load by all means possible, except by getting off his back. So the opposite of standing, I suppose, is like being down on your knees, but not like being down on your knees in the sense of like bowing, but like being down on your knees in the sense that you actually can't move anymore. And this brings us to this week's Torah portion, which includes a phrase that never appears again in the Torah, in a larger phrase that appears all the time in the Torah. So I don't know how many times the Torah mentions that God says to the Israelites, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It's dozens upon dozens of times. I have no idea how many times it's there, but I think we can all agree that it's there a lot. But this week, God says this to the Israelites and says something that is never said again by God in the entire Torah. I'm going to read the Hebrew first. Ani Adonai Elohechem asher tzeitti echem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Right, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is what we've heard many, many times before. Miyot lachem avadim ve'eshmor motot ulchem. I brought you out of the land of Egypt, where you were made to be slaves. Who broke motot echem. Shmor is like from the word shura, which has to do with breaking. Broke the yokes of your back, and this is the phrase: the olech etchem kumamiyut, and caused you to walk upright. And caused you to walk upright. This phrase is never seen again in the Torah, and certainly not in the context of mentioning the land of Egypt. So it begs the question, because no words in the Torah are accurate, what exactly are we supposed to learn from this inclusion of a phrase that I brought you out of the land of Egypt? And it could have said, from slavery to freedom, but it doesn't say that. It says, I caused you to walk straight or walk upright. So here are a few commentaries. So the Sifra, which is the Midrash, says that I walked you upright with a straight stature, afraid of no one. So if you think about the phrase, duck out of a crowd, you don't want to be noticed. Oftentimes, even if you're not actually ducking, we use the expression because we assume that when you're trying not to be noticed, you're going to crouch down so that no one can see you, which is obviously harder for those of us who are tall and easier for those of us who are short. But the basic idea is you don't want to stand fully erect if you want people to see you. So the Midrash basically says, if you're not afraid, you are willing to walk tall, which I'm pretty sure is also a movie about I want to say it was either about Bob Dylan or Johnny Cash, but it was like a movie. There was a movie called Walk Tall. The second one comes from the Gemara in Baba Batra. This one's just kind of funny to show you that the rabbis have commentaries that don't always make sense. Rabbi Meir says In the future, the Jewish people have the stature of 200 cubits, equivalent to 2 times the height of Adam, the first man. So there is an idea in rabbinic tradition that the first people were like super big, like the size of like the dinosaurs. So like you had like, you know, people who were like 15 feet tall or whatever it is, like cubits is like a rabbinic measurement. So there is an idea that in the Messiah we're all going to be taller, but not just like a little taller, like a lot taller, like feet upon feet taller, like tall that we could not get our, you know, that we would hit our heads on those bridges that they remind you like don't have a truck go over it that had, you know, that's too high. Obviously, that's not the interpretation that's most meaningful to me, but I do think it's interesting that there are rabbis who believe that part of a messianic future means that we're all going to be taller.
I'll take it.
Yeah. For anyone who's ever been told like you can't ride something because you're too short, you know, like I guess that would appeal to us. But again, it's not even like a little bit tall. It's like a lot taller. Like, you know, you would make like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar look small. And so, and this leads to the second commentary, which is also there, but and this has to do with sort of the alphabet. But I want to turn to the back page, so I know I don't run through every single commentary. When you go to the Middle Ages, they start to narrow in on what the rabbis of that era feel walking tall means. And again, in general, it's not that we're all going to be like 20 feet tall. Sorry to disappoint. Rashi says on this verse, I deserve that you should put your trust in me, that I am able to do all these things. For behold, I brought you forth from the land of Egypt and wrought great miracles for you. In other words, Rashi actually doesn't want to dismiss the idea that we might all be 20 feet tall. But really what Rashi is saying is like, I did all these things for you. I made you walk like a free people. So remember that everything that I say I will do, I can do, and you have proof that I can do it. That's number one. The Rashbam, who is his grandson, kind of takes the same approach. When the yoke is removed, when something is taken off our backs, you can hold your head high. So I think I mentioned this like last week. Like a yoke, a burden, can be a physical burden. It also can be a symbolic burden. So last week we talked about the mitzvot that have to do with poverty in the time of the Bible, and poverty is a kind of yoke on a person's back. It's not like you're carrying a 500-pound, sack on your back. You're not literally like hunched over, but you're hunched over mentally because you're living in a life of scarcity. I finished watching a TV show this year called Atlanta with Donald Glover. Has anyone you've seen it, Robin? Okay. So in like the first season, like Donald Glover, before he starts to like make money as like a manager of this rapper named Paperboy. I know, right? But he says a comment says poor people are too busy trying not to be poor. That's like what a yoke is, like a symbolic yoke. Like I'm too busy trying not to be poor to worry about these other things, which I think has been like exposed a little bit by the recent killing on the New York subway system of Jordan Neely. Like a person who's in that dire straits has a 500-pound sack on their back all the time. It's just metaphorical, not like a literal sack. So Rashbam, I think, is saying when that's removed, you can hold your head high with a strong posture. The Sforno, who you may have noticed by now is one of my favorites. He's mainly because he's Italian and I like pasta. Sforno says that I made you walk erect. It's the opposite of Isaiah 51:23. Your tormentors who have commanded you, get down that we may walk over you. This is like Leo Tolstoy, right? Like literally walking on top of people is as much of a way that you can debase them as possible, right? Stepping, the notion of stepping, even stepping over people. But if you're actually willing to step on a person's back, that is in some ways just a symbol that you as another person see them as subhuman. So Isaiah, who writes a lot about what the world in the Messiah will be like, imagines that the world as it is a world where people step on each other's backs. And there's even a phrase about it in professional lives that, like, are you a person who, like, climbs a professional ladder by stepping on other people? Again, it's a phrase, but it's a phrase that all of us knows what it means. It's the same idea of breaking a person's back by stepping over them, even if you're not actually doing it literally. And then a new commentator, I don't think I mentioned Rabbeinu Bachya, he's also Spanish. He's Spanish. He says, I, author speaking, have already mentioned previously that the promises made in this paragraph have never been fulfilled during the period when the two temples were standing. They will, however, be fulfilled in the future. And the promises that Rabbeinu Bachya thinks are promises that sort of run the gamut. That the world that we aspire to live in is a world where everyone can walk tall, both literally and figuratively. Which brings me to the last commentary, which is from Abraham Joshua Heschel. Because the spot that basically says the same thing. Heschel says, when we say that God is present within all being, we do not mean that God hears in theme as a component or ingredient of their physical, there's a typo there, of their physical life. God in the universe is a spirit of concern for life. What is a thing to us is a concern to God. What is a part of the physical world of being is also part of a divine world of meaning. And this is the key comment. To be is to stand for a divine concern. That the idea of standing is a powerful one that he believes means standing in the presence of God, but also what it means when we say that people who believe in things stand up for things. They may literally stand up for them, they also get to stand up for them verbally. And people who choose to walk away from matters of divine concern stand back or step back. Again, might be literal, might be figurative, but standing is sneakily a very, very powerful idea. So God, who is very judicious with words in the Torah, says that I caused you Israelites to stand, to be able to stand. For standing means everything. To be able to stand. Shabbat shalom. Okay, so it's 11:50. Oh, sorry, 10:50. Sorry. Thanks. All right. We read from the Torah without taking out the Torah. If some changes, we will revise our plan. Poor Gershon family that decided to get away for the weekend, and Elaine, who decided to be selfish before her 90th birthday to go to her granddaughter's college graduation. How dare they be so selfish and have lives outside of synagogue? But we're going to read from the Torah, just from the books. So our Torah readers today are myself and Janet and Susan. Whoa! And that. So I'm going to begin with the blessing that is recited over Torah study, because we're not actually reading from a Torah scroll, which has its own blessing. And that blessing is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who commanded us in the keeping of your mitzvot and to engage in the study of Torah. The first aliyah is on page 738, chapter 25. Vayidaber Adonai Moshe Har Sinai Lemor Daber El Bnei Yisrael B'Yamartaliem Ki Tavohu El Haaretz Asher Ani Noten Lachem B'Shabbat Haaretz Shabbat Adonai Sheish Shanim Tizrah Sadecha Sheish Shanim Tizmor Karmecha V'Yasafta Et Tevuata. You'll notice here that in the first Aliyah that it uses the word Shabbat, but it actually is using Shabbat in a context of the land. That the idea that there should be the 7th year of what's known as the Shemitah year, where basically like you TV.
Is Shemitah supposed to be observed outside Israel too?
No. So what's known as a sabbatical year is the idea that every 7 years you're supposed to let the land lie fallow and not plant on it. It also means that all debts are supposed to be eliminated, but it only applies in the land of Israel. So when you are in the land of Israel, if you are ever in the land of Israel during your Shemitah, you will see that there's actually, things put on packages of food, basically pointing out whether or not this was made in sort of a Shemitah-friendly way for those people for whom that is an issue. But it only applies in the land of Israel. Yeah, Lou?
So just after this standpoint, literally just
So you have to sort of like you have to sort of zoom out from the way that we get food in the 21st century for a moment and think about how food was eaten in the time of the Bible. So I don't know if any of you are like into permaculture. No one knows. Okay, everyone. Robin knows permaculture. Okay, so you want to explain what permaculture is? No. Okay, permaculture is that basically even a lot of the food that we consider like natural food, and by that I mean like food that's like planted in the ground and not made in a factory, is not natural in the sense that we have to make sure that it's being planted in order for it to regrow. So like all the wheat fields like in North America like wouldn't produce wheat every year if we didn't actually like keep planting them. So there's a notion of what's called multiple kinds of food, which are called annual foods and perennial foods. And annual foods are basically like, they're food that will keep naturally producing whether you do anything to it or not. And then there's food that like basically you have to do something to in order to plant. So in the time of the Torah, in some sense, it's basically saying like during the Shemitah year, you can only eat food that's naturally grown. Like, fruit trees are like kind of a good example of this. Like, there are certain plants that just naturally grow certain kinds of berries and fruits that are naturally there. I don't think they were making an ecological statement back then, like that's just how they ate. But there are people who are like really into the Shemitah year today, even outside of Israel TV, because they see that as an opportunity not to sort of pour like pesticides and chemicals in the ground, because you just have to have, it's like the same way that I can go to the grocery store today and get any kind of fruit I want at any time of year, which is not a natural way for the world to go. It's only that way because we have people who are constantly willing to plant, fruits and vegetables, in certain ways. But because it's the 7th year, it's also called Shabbat in some ways. A Shabbat for the land as opposed to a Shabbat for people. Yeah, feel free to ask more questions. This works for me.
It's sort of like in way back when Joseph was in charge of making sure that they had enough food for the 7 years of famine.
Yeah, I mean it is right. So
they were definitely given out of school grain, which is what would be in the question or any letter to improve the plan.
Right, so Susan said a lot of fantastic things in that comment because first of all, it is important to remember that in the famine that Joseph predicts, it involves the number 7, which is just like a very important number, like in the Torah in general. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that it says there will be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Because 7's found all over the Torah. But you're allowed to store the food, to use it in that year. But it's kind of unclear. Some Bible scholars actually are not sure that this actually happened, because if you let the land lie fallow in the 7th year, you're actually kind of ruining it for the year before and the year after. So they sort of argue that, like, if you actually did this the way it's described, you might actually, like, ruin your food supply. It's sort of unclear.
But I think there are societies where the agriculture work was done, where you would say you have like your land divided into quarters.
Yeah.
And one quarter would be left fallow for every year, alternating so that land would then be replenished.
This is like totally gone beyond my knowledge of agriculture, but I think that, but yes, I mean, the point I was making about it is that technically, if you're doing it, that somehow the year before Shemitah and the year after Shemitah is going to also have the food supply be different. But again, it's like it's interesting because the food part I think is actually ends up being less important than the debt part. That, like, the Bible is very big on the idea that people should not incur long-term debt, so that in the 7th year these debts are forgiven, and then in the 50th year they're like, whole other ones are forgiven. Like in slavery is also like forgiven, because, which in some ways seems like to be a stronger statement than even the agricultural stuff. Let's read the second Aliyah, because the second Aliyah actually talks about the same thing. But we're gonna keep going. Also on page 738. Ubashana Ashri Shabbat Shabbaton Yel Aretz Shabbat Ladonai Sadaka Lo Tizra Karmika Lo Tizmor Etzifia Pitziraka Lo Tizor Getting Ben Niziraka Lo Tizor Shat Shabbaton Yel Aretz Vaita Shabbat Aretz Lachem Leochla L'Kal Badecha V'Lamatecha Uliskirika Ultoshabecha Marini Mach Believe in Techa Balakaya Shir Dartsecha Tiekol Tuatalekol. Only interesting note here about the same mitzvah is that it applies to sort of all people, like everyone has to be able to benefit from it. So when it refers to garim, ger is technically the word we use today for someone who converts to Judaism. Ger probably meant at the time of the Torah just a stranger, like a person that just wasn't known to the community but was like residing there. But those people also are beneficiaries and are sort of obligated under this same piece. It's meant to be like a communal mitzvah in that way. Third Aliyah, I know not as exciting as the first one. V'safarta lecha sheva shabbatot shanim sheva panamim v'ayu lecha yemei sheva shabbatot hashanim tesha v'arba'im shana v'avarta shofar trua b'kodesh hashvi b'esor lakodesh v'yom ha'kippurim ta'bir shofar b'kol artzachem v'kidashtem et shnat hamishim shana v'tem dror Baretz l'chol yoshveh yovel hi tieh lachem yishavtem ish halakuzato v'ish al mishpachto tashuvu yovel hi shana l'chamishim shana tieh lachem lo tisra'u v'lo tiksaru et sificheha v'lo tiksaru et nizireha ki yovel hi kodesh tieh lachem min hasadeh tov Kalu etuata Mishnah Yovel Hazot Hashuvu Ish Al Akuzato. So this is the second. Shemitah is one piece of this. Yovel is the other piece. And Yovel, in addition to the debt, basically 7 times 7 is 49, right? Like the counting of the Omer is also 49. And then the 50th year is was known as the Jubilee year. And the Jubilee year is a year where it's not just that you're leaving the land a certain way, it's not just that you're relieving debts, it's also that you're letting all slaves go free. Because a lot of slaves are what we would really have called indentured servants. So they essentially were working for someone for free to pay off a debt. Litza actually and I are reading the same book right now. It's called Debt, a History. It's like 700 pages long. It's by an anthropologist named David Graeber who died a few years ago. But basically, and I got to be honest and say it's really interesting, but I only understand about half of what I'm reading. No offense, David. But he basically talks about the idea that that someone's debt is something that we should own in the long term as a relatively recent phenomenon. That's why there was concepts in ancient societies of relieving debts regularly. It's also like the way that today, like in societies that have a lot of social unrest, one of the first things you do is you relieve a lot of the debts. Because he argues that today, people actually treat debt as a thing that you own to make money off of, and that's a relatively recent thing. So in the concept of the Jubilee year, the basic idea is that you can't do that forever. You're not allowed to do that forever. You might wonder how the rabbis actually deal with people having businesses with that. They do actually come up with sort of a legal fiction for it, but it's still basically the idea that you can't own people's debt forever, because again, it's like the equivalent of standing on top of their neck. We're on page 740, and I believe Janet is reading it up here. Oops.
Continue with fifth reading on page 741, verse 19. Rabbi, do you want to comment on
I'm good.
Okay. I'll just point out that it says that in the 6th year, they'll get enough for 3 years, because if you plant in the 8th year, you won't get your harvest until the 9th year. Here we continue, 742, verse 25. Final reading is on page 742, verse 29.
Check with that. Yeah, we can continue with the Haftorah, which is also soon.
Also be, and figured out to be an interesting one that's you can cover separately where it actually has something about a particular land, even though they're going into exile. So the Haftorah that we'll be reading is on page 763. Kata Yuda Kituba Barzel Tzibor and some Shamir Marusha Al Liba Ulakarno Bismota He's for and he's the Khotam, Bashir I am, I'll make Trana, I'll Barakabo, Hariri Basada, Elicha, O Arts, O Oats Rotefa, O Baza Etain, Motefa, Bechata, Bechogulefa, Besamte. The sunlight of Minakalatecha, Ashinatata, Natatila, Lavadativa, and Boibefa, La Arts, Sherbo, Yadata, Kiech, Namtempiaki, and Olam Tukat. Oh, Amar Adonai, Arur, Hager, Shita, Padam, the Sambasar, Zero, Min Adonai, Yasunibo, the Hayaka, Ar Araba, the Loyera, Kiaboto, Shafan, Fare, Rimamikar, Eretz Lecha, the Motation. Baruch HaGeber Sherif Tak B'Adonai, B'Adonai B'Tavo, B'Haya Ke'eshatu Hamayim, Ayuval Yishlach Shorsha, V'lo Yir'eh Yavachom, B'Haya Alei Ranan, Krishna, Soret, Lohi'ah, Veloyamish, Me'asoperi, Ado Halei, Mikol Yamushu, Mi'edainu, Ani Adonai, Boker Le'Bokein Kalayon, V'latei La'ish Keep Rafa, keep free Ma'alav, Korei Zavar V'Yalad, Ose Osher V'lo V'Mishpat, V'Chatzi Yamak Ye'etzenu, U'B'Afrito Yenava. Say, Kavod, Maro, Rishon, Mako, Mitashenu, Mikveh, Israel, Adonai, Kol Ozdecha Yevoshu, Mesurai, Ha'aretz Yikatevu, Ki Etzvu, Mekor Mayim Chayim Et Adonai, Refine Adonai Erofe, Oshieni V'Ashea, Iti Lati Ata.
Shark.
Yeah. Repeat to you.
In the spirit of all of words always catching my attention in this Haftarah has this line that I thought, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it means, which is verse 9, which is Akob Halev Mikol V'Anushhu Mi Yedatenu, which is translated most devious is the heart. Is it perverse? It is perverse. Who can fathom it? I'm quite curious about what this is. It's a very strong statement about the heart. So just a thought. I think it was Rihanna who said the heart wants what it wants. I think it was Rihanna. I'm not positive. Okay. We continue on page 148 with a prayer for our country. Please rise. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessings for our country, for its government, for its leaders and advisors, and for all who exercise just and rightful authority. Teach them insights from your Torah that they may administer all affairs of state fairly, that peace and security, happiness and prosperity, justice and freedom may provide in our midst. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. May citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond in true harmony. To banish hatred and bigotry and to safeguard the ideals and free institutions that are the pride and glory of our country. May this land under your providence be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom. Help them fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen. Prayer for the state of Israel, page 149. Avinu Shabbat Shemayim, Sor Yisrael V'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmikak L'Lateinu. Again, Aleh Brachastecha, Ufros Aleh Sukat Shlomecha, Ushlach Orcha V'Yadkal Rashat, Sarah V'Yotzeh, V'Tagnim Beitzat Tova Milfanecha, Kazega Yidei V'Ginei Eretz Koshenu, Vankilim Elohim Yeshua V'Atar Nitzachon Tatrem, V'Natah Shalom Ba'aretz V'Simchato Lam Le'Yoshveha V'Nomar. Amen. You may be seated. Page 151. Ashrei. Ashrei Oshrei Beitecha, Ogi Hallelujah Sela, Ashrei Shekakolo, Ashrei Shadonai Eloha, Zilon Amira, Dor L'Dor Shabbat Masecha, L'Goratecha Yagidu, L'Darke Bogodecha, V'Divrei Niflotecha Atzmicha, V'Zuz Nartecha Yomeru, Zekarav Du'animihu, V'Zinadacha Yiranimihu, Tobunalakol Brachama Mahasav, Yoduchai Komasecha, V'Nasidecha Berkucha. Tihillat Adonai Yedaber Pi, V'Orech Kol Basar Shem Kodsho Le'olam Va'ed, V'Anachnu Nevarech Yah, Me'atav Yad Olam, Hallelujah. We rise on page 156 or 156b for the silent Musaf Amidah. Please recite the Amidah in Hebrew or English, whatever language is most meaningful to you. And of course, this is also a perfect opportunity to offer your own personal prayers before God. Vita Bershayim Sereres and Gechol is one of the Methapines after Ramon and say shalom, shalom, Imrama. Yaseh, shalom. Oh, say shalom, shalom, Imrama. Yaseh, shalom. Yaseh, shalom. Shalom aleinu, ay ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oh, say shalom, shalom b'ramah. Yaseh, shalom. We continue on page 182 with Enk Eloheinu. You may be seated. Enk Eloheinu, Enk Adonenu, Enk Malkeinu, Enk Moshienu, Mik Eloheinu, Mik Adonenu, Mik Malkeinu, Mik Moshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shetiru Avoteinu Lefanecha et Ketoret Hasamim Enk Eloheinu, Enk Adonenu, Enk Malkeinu, Enk Moshienu. Page 183. Please rise for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'atei gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu koye haratzon, v'lo samanu mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim, Lifnei Melech Malchei HaMlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz, v'yamahu yihye Adonai echad, u'shma'o echad. You may be seated. We don't have a minyan to recite Kaddish, but I'm going to read the yard sites for this week, which last night started the 37th day of the counting of the Omer. We observe the following yard sites here at ACI. Mo Cohen, Max Himoff, Hyman Weinstein, Greta Meyer, Barbara Rose, Philip A. Slainer, David Steiner, Carl Newberger, Rose Wishnia, Manuel Gelber, Barnett Kramer, Leopold Schwartz, Jack Michael, Leo Bard, Isaac Varon, Fanny Wall, Robert Weber, Gene Siegel, Dorothy Zinn, Harold Hochberg, Gene Simon, Isaac L. Bogart, Fanny Hoffberg, Bernard Rabinowitz, Sarah Sommer, Lillian Rissick Moss, Clara Feinstein, Laura Goldberg, Bertha Nussenblatt, Julius Rodkowski, and Sam Markowitz. Announcements for today, in the absence of Ari to do them for me. Services will be held next week. Sorry that we didn't have it. Shavuot will be here before we know it, so you should have gotten an email from me this week, and it should have been mentioned in the Friday flyer, which is that for Shavuot, for Erev Shavuot on Thursday evening, we will be partnering with Malchut, our friends based in Jackson Heights, for Tikkun La'el Shavuot, an evening study and song. They will be hosting us at one of their locations. All that information is found online. The only thing you need to know is you do have to RSVP. And you do have to RSVP through their website. You can't RSVP through us. And I hope that all of you will be there. I will be teaching along with Rabbi Rachel Goldenberg, who's the founding rabbi at Malchut.
But there will be a link on how to find that on our website tomorrow morning.
There you go. There you go. And then we will have services on the first day of Shavuot, but not on the second day. Although hopefully, assuming we get permission, we will be participating in the open streets in Astoria around Shavuot. I believe we'll be doing a big screen. But I have not gotten the indication from Joanna that we've actually gotten confirmed that we can do this yet. But since Shabbat is a dairy holiday, we'll give out some ice cream to our friends in Astoria.
Actually.
Yeah.
Also, we are getting an AED for the building. We just had CPR and AED training on Tuesday. We are planning on doing that again if you missed it, and everyone who wasn't, missed it. So keep an eye out for that. Please sign up. It's a wonderful mitzvah to learn how to save a life.
Excellent announcement. Yes. Okay. And we conclude with the singing of Adon Olam on page 186. Followed by that, we will have Kiddush and Hamotzi, and invite everyone to enjoy some food in the auxiliary room. Adon. Okay. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nibra Li'ed Nasa B'Kepso Kol Azai Melech Shimoni Kra Azai Melech Shimoni Kra B'Yacharei Kiflot HaKol Levado Imlok Nora V'hu Haya V'hu Omeh V'hu Yiyeh B'Tifara V'hu Yiyeh B'Tifara V'hu Echad V'yein Sheni Am Shilo Le'achbira B'li Reishi B'li Tachlit B'lo Ha'oz V'ha'misra B'lo Ha'oz V'ha'misra V'hu Eli V'chai Go'ali V'tzor Kabli V'yet Tzara V'hu Nisi U'manosli Menakosi V'yom Ekra Minakosi b'yom ekra be'ado achi ruvi b'yet ishan be'ayira ve'im ruvi gebiati Adonai li v'lo ira Adonai li v'lo ira. Please rise, page 315 for Kiddush. Shamaru ben Israel Hashabbat Lasot Hashabbat Gar Tabarit Olam Beini Oven ben Israel Ki Leolam Kishesh Yamim Masada Shemaim Yad Aretz V'Yam Shvi Shabbat Bein Afash Zachor Yom Shabbat LeKodesho Sheikh Shavim Tava V'Sida Kol Melachtecha V'Yom HaShvi Shabbat Na'alecha Lo Tazar Kol Melacha Atzah Uvitcha Uvitecha Avdecha V'Maha V'Mtecha V'Yercha Shir B'Sharecha Kishesh Yamim Masada Shemaim Yad Aretz V'Yam V'Kol Sherban Bein Ach V'Yam Shvi Akim Barachana Yom HaShabbat V'Yikatsheu Savri Baruch Atah Eloheinu Melech Haolam Borei Pri HaGafen Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Motzi Lechem Min Haaretz Shabbat Shalom.